Hey history fans, so today we're going to do something a little bit different. Today I'm going to show you how to crochet a project while we talk about the history of that object. So this is what we're going to make. We're going to make crocheted crab rangoons. And I know it's goofy, I just made one the other day on the spur of the moment because Chris thought it would be funny. And I posted it on Facebook and everybody was like over the moon for it. So I thought, well, I could make a video and show you how to crochet. And then I also thought, oh, I should look up what's the history of Crab Rangoon. So I decided to combine those two things and we're going to do a history crochet video. If you guys like this format, if you find it kind of cool, I have some more ideas for crochet projects that we can talk about crochet and do the history about all that stuff together. So if you like it, tell me in the comments that you just want to see more of them, okay? So here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to talk about the crochet part first. I'm going to tell you what we need. I'm going to show you the stitches, all of that stuff, and we'll get started crocheting. It's a really simple pattern. It's basically we're just making a square. So while we're working through crocheting the actual square, I'll talk about the history, and then at the end I'll show you how to put all the finishing touches on the Crab Rangoon. So I will put timestamps either at the bottom, or maybe if YouTube will let me do chapters on this one, I'll do chapters. That way, if you really are only interested in the pattern, you can get that. If you're really only interested in the history, you can get that, but we'll kind of break it up a little bit like that. All right. So what we're going to make today is this Crab Rangoon. And you see a lot of patterns online for them. They're so easy. But the difference between this one and the ones online that I've seen so far is that I've got the little cream cheese sticking out. So I'll show you how to make that too. This is what we're making today. It's the tiny one. This is one I've made before. And then I'm also working on this giant one that's going to be like throw pillow size. So this pattern is really easy to adjust the size, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So the only supplies you need basic crochet supplies. You need a scissors, an embroidery needle. Well, is that what it's called? I don't know. It's a fat, you know what it is. A crochet hook. I am using a 5.5 millimeter crochet hook. This one, I like this one because it seems to give you a tight enough stitch that the stuffing doesn't show through, but it's also a big enough stitch that you don't feel like you're crocheting for a bazillion years to make one little Crab Rangoon. I will say, if you decide to go any smaller than the one we're going to make today, I would probably switch it up and use a smaller needle and maybe smaller yarn, okay? Because this one, it's cute this way, but I feel like if I made the Crab Rangoon any smaller, the stitches would it would look weird because it's too big. Okay, so you need those things. You need some stuffing, and then you need yarn. So you pick whatever yarn you want. You can get 2 colors. You can make it without the cream cheese. It's super simple if you make it without the cream cheese. But what I am using today, I just went to Hobby Lobby and found the 2 colors that I thought were most representative of an actual Crab Rangoon. So I'm using this. It's called I Love This Yarn. And we are using the light taupe right there. This is for the outside of the Crab Rangoon. And then this, it's the same brand, I Love My Yarn. And this is going to be the cream cheese part, and this is the ivory. Okay, so that's what I got. I got it from Hobby Lobby, but I don't care. You just have 2 colors. You can make a black and green one. Anything could be cool. You make Halloween Crab Rangoons. So this is like the easiest pattern. We're going to chain some on and then just single crochet until we have a square. And I'll show you real quick the stitches if you haven't crocheted before. They're pretty simple, but there's plenty of videos out there to teach you how to crochet if that's something you want to learn, if I'm not showing you well enough, okay? For this one, we are going to chain 21. That'll give us 20 working stitches. Just to give you an idea, this one was 31. And this one was 126. So basically, this is that big long one. basically you want to chain as many as you want. I like to keep it even numbers, like 30, and then add one so that you can skip that first stitch at the beginning. Okay, so I'm going to try and show you here on the camera. Like I said, I'll show you basic stitches. You can rewind and watch it again if you need to see it again. But this is how you make a slip knot, all right? So you're going to wrap it around your finger like that. So you have a little X on your finger. And then this back thread here is actually going to become the loop on your hook. So you're going to kind of pull this out a little bit and pull this thread through so that you end up with a knot like that. Now, the whole point of a slip knot is that if you pulled it like this, it pops right out. So if you didn't get that, try again. Okay, so once we get our slip knot on here, for the size that we're going to try and do on the video, you can make this any size you want, just make a square. But for the size we're going to do on the video, we're going to do 21 chain stitches. If you are a knitter, this counts as like a cast on, not the same in crochet, so do not count this stitch, all right? So for a chain stitch, all we're going to do, and the biggest thing, it just takes hand coordination, okay? You're going to yarn over your hook like that. It helps to kind of hold this one, especially on the first few. And you're just going to pull that straight through. So yarn over, pull straight through. You're going to do that 21 times. So let's all get to that point, 21. All right, so we've got our 21 chains on there. And now we're just going to single crochet until it is a square. So we're not going to single crochet in this first one. You're going to skip a stitch. Can you see? We're not going to single crochet in this first one. We're going to skip a stitch and single crochet. Single crochet is very easy. All you do, take your needle, put it through that top part of the V on the stitch. You're going to wrap the yarn around once, and then you're going to pull this through your work. So now you should have 2 on your hook. Wrap it around again and pull through. And you've just done a single crochet. That's all you do. That's what you're going to do basically for the whole project. All right. So if you are already a pro crocheter and you skipped the little intro part where I showed you the stitches, this is the pattern. This is all we're doing. We chained on 21. And then we skip that first chain and we're going to single crochet in the rest of them. So you're going to end up with 20 stitches across back and forth. You can do more than 20. Usually I try and keep that, the stitch block, like an even number, like 20, 30, 40, whatever. But whatever you want that stitch block to be, add 1, and then you'll have your chain on count. You're going to single crochet till the end of the row. Then you're going to turn. And then you're going to do 1 chain stitch to get to that next row and then single crochet all the way back. Pretty standard, just granny square what you're doing. So we're just going to crochet until it turns into a square. And how do you know if it's a square? It's real easy. But like for this one, I'll show you. I have this giant one here. And obviously, this is not a square. We all know that. But if I was going to try and measure if it was a square, all I'm going to do is take it and fold it over on itself. So I'm going to take this side and fold it like this. And you can see, now you got that triangle. When the sides meet, so if I were to fold it over and it ended up all the way down here, I would know that I had a square if I could make the whole thing into a triangle. So it doesn't have to be precise. You can measure if you want, but as long as you can fold it over and it basically makes a square, you've pretty much got it, okay? So we're going to keep single crocheting and then chain after we turn, and I will tell you about the story of Crab Rangoon. All right, so on with the history part. So like all history, it is intertwined with lots of different events in history, but it's also much deeper than we can get into in this video. Okay, so just keep in mind that a lot of the ideas are kind of simplified, but it all does tie together. So, the invention of Crab Rangoon. Our story actually starts in 1776 because America signed the Declaration of Independence, which we all probably knew. Weird thing is, did you ever think about the fact that, like, we all celebrate 4th of July and such, but King George didn't know that we did that on the 4th of July. He didn't even get word about the Declaration of Independence until August, because that whole declaration had to be sent back on a ship. And then he didn't even respond until like February of 1777, because that's just how long it took to do things back then. So anyway, Britain was already in financial crisis. They had like 170 million pounds of debt because of the French and Indian Wars and the French Revolution and things like that. The Revolutionary War cost them another about 250 million pounds. So at the end of the Revolutionary War, Britain's looking around and they're like, we are super far in debt and we've just lost our colonies that we were taxing and we need more money. So they looked around and they thought, where can we get more money? And they realized that they were in a trade deficit with China because the British very much like tea from China, very much like porcelain, and very much like silk, all which came from China. So Britain was sending a ton of silver to China every year to pay for those things that they liked. So the British didn't really have anything the Chinese wanted, and that was made very clear by the emperor, who actually wrote the British a letter stating that fact. And they just didn't need anything from Britain. So Britain looked around and thought, what else do we have? What could China like? And they remembered that they had that little holding of, all of India. And one of the things that grows very well in India is opium. Now, if you're not familiar with opium, opium is a drug. It's made from the poppy plant. And that drug nowadays can be made into things like codeine, heroin, and even fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. So it's a very strong pain reliever is what they used to use it for. And in fact, in Britain and America and pretty much everywhere, they would make this tincture called laudanum. And it was basically opium powder dissolved in alcohol. And you would take that for everything, like a sore throat, laudanum. Stomachache, laudanum. Your wife is having hysteria, laudanum. Everybody took laudanum all the time. It was very popular. They did use opium in China already for some pain relief. And of course, just like any drug, some people in China had discovered the fact that you could indeed use opium just as a recreational drug. But Britain decided that they really wanted China to buy a lot of opium. So in the late 1700s, Britain started shipping opium to China. And not a little opium, like a lot of opium. And while there are a lot of reasons for addiction, availability certainly has to come into play. So of course it's not all Britain's fault, but Britain was very much loving the fact of how much opium was being bought in China. So the British started sending a lot of opium over to China. And by a lot, I mean like a lot. So one website that I read said that the British were sending about 40,000 casks a year over to China. And each cask weighs, well, it doesn't weigh, but it holds about 120 pounds of opium, which means they were sending about 4.8 million pounds of opium to China every year, if my math is correct. So around 1800, the Emperor of China looked around and saw that many of the Chinese people were now addicted to opium. They had opium dens. And as we know right now with our horrible, awful, terrible, not funny at all fentanyl crisis, it can wreck you, right? It can wreck you. It can wreck the community. It can wreck the economy. And so the Chinese emperor was like, we are done with this British opium. You cannot send it in at all. So he outlawed opium. And some of the dealers that were in China got really very strict punishments, including everything up to and including execution. The crazy thing was that there was only one port open in China to the British, and that was Canton. And so they closed that port to the British. And like after they closed the port to the British, they were still getting opium smuggled in by British and other and merchants from other countries. So the British would be down in India and basically sell the opium to whoever wanted it with a big like wink wink, go sell it in China because there's a market for it. So they were smuggling it in at that point, you know, unknowingly selling it to smugglers. So China was very upset about this. They closed the ports to the British. People were not allowed to sell the British food, and they were just trying to basically get rid of them. Well, the British were not having it. They needed the money, and like I said, as with every war, there was more than one reason, but the opium trade was a big reason for the First and Second Opium Wars. So we're not going to go too much in detail into the Opium Wars, but it was a bad deal. Especially for China. So at the time, the Chinese did have some modern weapons. I mean, they invented gunpowder, but they were century behind the British as far as weaponry. And the British had these ships that could go in very low water. They were big ships, so they could basically sail their gigantic fighting cannonball ships right up the rivers and attack. And the Chinese just had nothing they could do to stop those big ships. The Chinese did have some like muskets and things, but the British were far superior in firepower. Okay, so the British ships could get up the rivers and all of that, and they were a huge force against the Chinese army. There was one ship in particular called the Nemesis that was so effective that the Chinese started calling it the devil ship. This is a crazy part though. So they were trying to figure out how to get rid of those British ships. Like what could they do to counterattack on those ships? And there's one famous Chinese general that had this idea, and like, it's so crazy to me, but what they planned to do was they planned to take monkeys and train them basically to find the gunpowder storage on the British ships. And so their big plan after that was they were going to take these trained monkeys and light fireworks and tie the fireworks to the monkeys' back and then throw the monkeys onto the British ships with the hope that the monkeys would, I suppose, have time to find the gunpowder storage and light it on fire with the lit firework on their back and explode the British ships. Now, this plan never went into action, and for the craziest reason. Like, you would think, oh, we don't want to strap fireworks to monkeys, or we don't think the monkeys will be able to get through. I mean, how would the monkeys get through all those sailors? But no, the reason that they changed the plan was because they didn't think they could get close enough to the British ships to throw said monkeys. So that's a fun fact about Chinese ancient warfare. So basically, in the reports I see online, in the first Opium War, about 350 British soldiers were killed compared to about 3,000 Chinese warriors were killed. So it just was completely uneven. So the British came in, took over. They signed a treaty, yada, yada. They wanted more ports open. They wanted opium to be legal, which the Chinese never agreed to. They never agreed to letting opium be legal again. And then a lot of scholars say that the first Opium War never really ended. It just sort of became the Second Opium War. But after the Second Opium War, the British and the French won again. And the French got involved because they had one of their missionaries in China who had been killed. And so, again, it was just a slaughter for the Chinese people. This is also where they lost Hong Kong. That's where Hong Kong got ceded to the British. So, after the Opium Wars, the Chinese were left in not a great spot, right? They'd just been through a war. There was a lot of opium addiction still in China. And, you know, China lost money and all the things that happened after war. So a lot of Chinese people were looking for somewhere else to go and something else to do to make their life better. Oh, lo and behold, in 1848, just after those opium wars took place, gold was discovered in California. Now, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the very first gold miners in California were actually people from Asia, especially Chinese people, because they were all looking for somewhere else to go and to get out of China. It's weird to think about, but at the time, the trip from China to California was faster and easier than the trip from, say, New York to California, because from China you just get on a boat and go across and go to New York or go to California. But if you're coming from New York, you've got to like get on a wagon and fight the Native Americans that don't particularly want you there and go through the desert and over mountains and all kinds of stuff. So at the very beginning of the gold rush, there was a lot of Chinese people that beat the Americans to the gold. And as usual, the Americans that got beat out for gold were just absolutely grateful that the Chinese people got it and happy for them and just encouraging to them. And no, of course they weren't. Of course they were like, that's our gold. And so they started making laws banning Chinese people from panning for gold, banning Chinese immigration, all sorts of things like that. And so by the 1880s, we had decided that we did not want Chinese people in California taking our gold anymore. And we had the Chinese Exclusion Act. Now, let me keep reminding you that all of these things are way more complicated than I'm making them, but just going over the basics here. So we did not allow many Chinese immigrants into the country. And in fact, when we finally did start allowing immigration again after the start of World War II, because they were our ally and we thought, we should probably let them immigrate in a little bit. But even after that, we only allowed 105 Chinese people a year to immigrate in, which is like nothing, right? However, there was this little thing that has been nicknamed the Lo Mein loophole, which not in love with that name, but this is what it is. It basically said that certain merchants and certain businesses were still allowed to travel back and forth to China and recruit Chinese people to come work in America. One of those merchant types that was allowed was restaurants. And so from 1910 to 1920, the amount of Chinese restaurants in America doubled. And then from 1920 to 1930, it doubled again. And a lot of Chinese people were starting in the restaurant business because they could make a go at a restaurant and then still be allowed to travel back and forth to China to see their families and to bring their families here. So nowadays we think of Chinese food as being kind of like cheap dinner out, right? Like all you can eat Chinese buffet, awesome. But back then that act made them have certain standards for a restaurant. So you couldn't just open a shack or a little hole in the wall Chinese restaurant. You had to make a beautiful, lovely, fancy restaurant to qualify for this loophole. So back then, Chinese food got the reputation of being really expensive and really fancy and kind of like a special place to go to dinner. Kind of like nowadays we sort of think of like Italian as special like that. I don't know. But I digress. So now you've got all of these Chinese Americans in America. A lot of them are centered in California. And now we're starting to get into the days of World War II. And think about where were a lot of our servicemen stationed in World War II. Some went to Europe, but a lot of them ended up in the South Pacific, which, if you've ever been to the South Pacific, you know is an absolutely gorgeous place to be, especially not during wartime. So all of these World War II soldiers came back from the South Pacific and were telling their friends about how beautiful it was and yada, yada, yada. And that's when the kind of tiki culture took off. And that's when a little restaurant started in California that became very popular called Trader Vic's. So Trader Vic's really cashed in on the whole tiki culture, South Pacific kind of culture. And this is where a bunch of things come together to create our Crab Rangoon. So the chef at Trader Vic's was Chef Joe Young, who was a Chinese American. Now, I can't track down a ton of information on him. Do I know for 100% sure that he or his family came in through the lo mein loophole? No, I do not. But it seems like a reasonable bet that they had some connection with that. So this guy, Joe Young, cooked Chinese food for Trader Vic's because that's what he knew. So Trader Vic's menu originally was a lot of kind of upscale Chinese. Well, he was experimenting. He liked to experiment. And the other popular thing at the time was cream cheese, which like was in everything. Like, have you guys seen these books with like Jell-O? Everything was Jell-O salad. It was kind of the same deal with cream cheese, which, by the way, Philadelphia cream cheese was not from Philadelphia. A guy in New York City invented it, and then when they went to market it, at the time, Philadelphia was really well known for the quality of its dairy products, so they just said it was from Philadelphia so people would buy it, but really, it's from New York City. So anyway, Chef Joe Young, he was experimenting, and he put some cream cheese and some actual real crab, and A1 steak sauce of all things, and some hot sauce, and mixed it all together and put it in a wonton wrapper and fried it. And that is where we get Crab Rangoon. It started in the 1950s at Trader Vic's. But because of the tiki culture and the popularity of Trader Vic's and the fact that Chinese food was so abundant, that Crab Rangoon concept just spread like wildfire. And it still persists to this day. And so obviously everybody's got their own kind of thoughts about Crab Rangoon. I mean, some Crab Rangoon are sweet, some are not sweet. I've even seen like buffalo sauce Crab Rangoon. But that's where they came from. They came from basically the Chinese immigrants that came into America. The confluence of that and World War II and people returning from the South Pacific, that's why Crab Rangoon were made, and that's why they became popular, and also because they're stinking delicious. So anyway, that's the history of Crab Rangoon in a lot of minutes. So I am going to finish my little square here, and I'll be right back to tell you how to finish your Crab Rangoon. All right, so did y'all finish your square? Are we ready to put the Crab Rangoon together? So here's my square. And I'm going to turn the camera so you can see what I'm doing with my hands for the rest of the video, okay? So here is my Crab Rangoon square. And again, you can tell if it's square because you just take this corner, fold it over, and as long as you make a triangle, you know you've got a square. So it's a square. If you have never finished a crochet pattern before, I'm going to show you how to finish that last stitch real quick. So you've got your hook. Put the hook in there so I don't lose my place. And we're going to get my scissors and we're going to cut the end off. Now leave yourself a good tail and cut off the end here. And you're going to work that last single crochet stitch just like you normally would. So you put it in the stitch right here, work that single crochet stitch. But now, instead of working the next one or tying a knot or anything, you're just going to pull. You're going to pull that string all the way through, and that's going to leave you with a knot so that you have this complete square. Okay, so this is the part where you're going to need your needle like this, just a big plastic needle. You've got to get these ends woven in so that they don't look goofy in your finished Crab Rangoon. So you're just going to thread your needle like that. And then you are just going to kind of sew in and out and just get them stuck in there so that they're not hanging out and looking goofy. So see, you just kind of go in and out, and just weave those ends into your crochet so that they disappear. Okay, so once you have those ends woven in and you've just got your square with nothing sticking out, you're gonna fold up your Crab Rangoon and sew it together. So some people make their Crab Rangoon sideways like this, like in a restaurant. That is totally fine. You can do that too. The way I like to make it look is I fold it straight side to straight side. So like this. Okay, so fold it like that. And then where you see the middle, maybe fold it like this too. So you know the middle's like right here. So fold it in half like that. And in the middle, you're going to just do a quick stitch and stitch it together. And the more you can kind of catch that end in and kind of make itself its own knot, that is a good thing. Okay, so we're just going to hold it there for now. And then you're going to open it up and fold it like this and stitch it again together in the middle. Like that. Okay, see? So now we have the basic shape of our Crab Rangoon. Now, if you like it like this and you don't want to put the white cream cheese in it, that is fine. You can just sew a couple more both directions and call it good. This is the point, though, where I like to put the stuffing in. So even if you're going to not use the white stuff, you still want to put the stuffing in. I'm going to put one more stitch through it real quick. Okay, and we're just going to take some stuffing and just stick it in right through here. You can make it as full as you want it, but just make sure you don't fill it up so much that you get the stuffing kind of sticking out the sides. If you're going to put the cream cheese in, that doesn't matter as much, but if you're just going to leave it open like this, it will matter. You don't want a ton of it showing out. And then we're going to make the cream cheese part. The cream cheese part, same deal. Same thing you just did with this part, only you're going to do it smaller. What I like to do is I like to make 2 rectangles. And so usually a good size for this size Crab Rangoon is if you chain on 16, so you end up making 15 stitches. You're going to chain on 16 and then make about 4 rows. And you're just going to make 2 of those, so 2 little rectangles. All right? So make those and I'll be right back to show you what we do with those. Okay, so we've got our 2 little rectangles, just white rectangles. You do not have to worry about weaving these ends in because we're going to stick them into the Crab Rangoon and it won't matter in just a minute. So now you've got your 2 little rectangles. You are going to take your Crab Rangoon and just stick these in there underneath like that. And now they're just sticking out. You're going to tuck these little ends in and you can kind of twist in everything. Twist those in there. And then get them settled where you want them to be. So I'm going to put this one in here like that. And take this one and put it in this other side. Okay, so now that the cream cheese is in there, you need to secure it. You don't want it to look all the same, right? Because when cream cheese sticks out of a Crab Rangoon, it doesn't stick out evenly on every side of the Crab Rangoon. So as you stitch it up, you're going to kind of like judge where you want it to be. And also as we stitch around it, it'll make this center stronger because we're going to stitch around everything. So you're just going to take your needle and pick a place to start. So I'm going to start here. And you're going to grab just a teeny bit of the Crab Rangoon part. Let's see if I can make this bigger for you. A teeny bit of the Crab Rangoon part. And a teeny bit of the little white part, and you're just going to make a little stitch. And you're going to go ahead and do that all the way around the Crab Rangoon. You don't have to have them super, super close together, but you want them close enough together that you're not going to get a big line of yarn in between each stitch. But you're just going to stitch all the way around with these little stitches, and then it will be all secure, and I'll show you what to do after that in just a second. Okay, so now I've gone all the way around. All of that cream cheese is sewn in there, and now we just have this one end left to deal with. We are going to just make a little knot like this, okay, just to secure it. So you're going to pull it through a stitch. And it's just a regular sewing knot. So like before you get to the end, see how it has that loop there, right there? We're going to stick the needle back through the loop and just secure it with this little knot. Oh, not around the Crab Rangoon. And then we'll cut the end and we'll just weave it in like we did the last time. So I'm going to move my needle way down here. And we'll cut that like that so we don't have to deal with all that. And just kind of weave in the ends a couple times so it doesn't look like a mess. And then you can kind of, if you pull it kind of tight and cut it real close, don't cut your stitching. But then when you kind of pull it apart and tug it a little bit, that end of that yarn will disappear. And now you've got a Crab Rangoon. So look below. I'll write the pattern below in case you watched the video and then forgot what you were doing and you need to see the pattern. Also, I'll put a link to my Etsy page up there. I haven't done a lot with Etsy lately. There's not a lot up there, but I'm thinking I might put a couple of these up there in case you like them, but don't feel like crocheting. And if you're interested, not that you are, but when you go up there, when I'm finished with these, I'm going to have these two cute shawls up there too. I got a rainbow shawl and then this pretty sparkly shawl. So I put these up too when I'm finished with them, but you can see, obviously, still works in progress. So if you like the video, if you like to learn while you learn, or do while you learn, tell me in the comments, like and subscribe, and I will make more of them. I have some ideas for St. Patrick's Day.